Hello, we're starting to go live here. I'll give the channels and all the streaming technology a little bit of time to start working, but welcome. Um, the idea here is to hang out and to answer some questions. So please, if you have questions, go ahead and drop it in the comments below, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. Just put maybe 3 question marks before and after your question so that I can see that it is a question and I can easily pick them out. And then if you don't have any questions yet, drop in the comments where you're tuning in from. So let's go live here on Instagram. All right, should be live on Instagram now. My first time doing so. So if you are live on Instagram, please leave a comment. And like I said before to the other people on the stream, the idea here is that unfortunately there's no video this week from Audio University, but it will be a good opportunity for me to maybe jump on here, hang out with everybody, and answer some questions. I still wanted to jump on and see if I can help out a little bit since I don't have a video for you. So sorry about that. It's the first week we've missed in a while, but for good reason. And I see in the comments, we got somebody from Vancouver. Jennifer, welcome. We have Albuquerque, New Mexico, Jerome. We've got Charleston, South Carolina, the UK. Glad you could make it, Erwin. New York City. I just came back from there. More on that in just a moment. Awesome. We've got Ohio. Well, welcome everybody. Again, if you're just joining, we will be doing a little bit of a Q&A. I'll answer what I can, but I'll enjoy the questions even if I can't answer them, I'd expect. If you have a question, just leave it below in the comments on Facebook or YouTube and leave 3 question marks before and after your question. The reason there is no video is a good reason, I promise. It's because we've been really, really busy at Audio University, me and my team, with the AES convention that happened just last week. So if you're unfamiliar with AES, AES is a organization of audio engineers, the Audio Engineering Society. And I'll tell you, it's really pretty cool, the people you can meet and the people that are a part of this. It's everybody from students who are just studying. You've got freelance audio engineers. You've got some of the biggest names in the audio engineering space. And you've got real scientists doing research on acoustics and on electronics and all of these things that relate to audio, which if you go to one of these AES conventions one day, you'll see that a lot of things relate to audio. So if you're interested in checking out AES, this isn't sponsored or anything. It's a volunteer organization. But here's the page. As you can see, you can join. There is the AES convention that just ended. It was October 8th through 10th. But then there are also, it's like a journal, right? So all of these researchers can publish and get peer reviews here. So if you're interested in meeting people, networking, sharing like interests, or seeing cutting edge research, I'd recommend checking out AES. I saw a few people from the Audio University viewership at AES, which was really cool. And yeah, I also want to quickly shout out Hey Audio Student Facebook group. Again, not a sponsorship. I just love John Crivet, the guy who puts this together. He is one of the key people who got me involved with AES. You don't need an invite or anything. You just have to be interested in audio and you can join. But John really helped me understand the value of being a part of an organization like this. And if you're not a part of Hey Audio Student Facebook group already, I highly recommend you do it. This is free. You just join the group. And as you can see, we've got people sharing. Oh, look, Samantha Winter, one of the key team members for Audio University. Just people here sharing audio stuff. And you can come in here and ask questions. Sometimes you'll see job opportunities posted by John and some others. Facebook doesn't like that I'm not signed in, so I'll have to refresh this page, I guess. But there are 90.8 thousand members, and that ranges from, again, complete beginners to seriously heavy hitters in the industry. And some of the most vocal and engaged people in this group are those really experienced people, which is cool. And that's something that you come to learn when you go to an AES conference, is that the people in this industry want to help, most of them, like almost all of them. And it's really cool. I see your questions coming in, and we will start getting to those here shortly. What's up, Mac? Mac is a member of our community, the Audio University community. I'll put the QR code up here if you want to check that out. That's just a place where, in addition to YouTube content that you get here, we wanted to take it a step further so that you can actually get a little bit of access to the person teaching. That way you can learn with the content and then also ask questions throughout the month that you're a member. So, it's more like a full, more well-rounded learning experience. So check out the membership if you're interested. I wanted to quickly share a few really cool experiences that I had while I was at AES. Sometimes it feels a little bit kind of like bragging, and I promise you that's the last thing I want. I'm just excited to share it, and I know that the community here are people who would really appreciate this. So please understand that the last thing I want to do is be braggy, but you probably already knew that if you know me at all. So let me pull up some pictures of stuff that we're working on. First off, the first day of AES, I went to an event hosted by Neumann, where they had an immersive audio setup, and we were able to listen to some music. And my appointment for that was at 11, and somebody else showed up. I saw as I was getting on the elevator, and as you can see, perhaps by the back of his head, that person who showed up 30 minutes prior to his appointment was no other than Bob Katz, legendary audio engineer. So that was a really cool experience to sit down and hear his thoughts on immersive audio and some of the mixes that Neumann played for us through their speakers. Really, really cool experience. First time ever meeting him. And like I said, he was there for the AES convention. These are the kinds of people that you can expect to run into, or at least see walking around the floor and through the hallways. The next day, I was interested to go over to a Sony event. They have this thing, Sony 360 Reality. That's an object-based mixing platform. And what we did there was they put some microphones in my ear, right, in the left ear and the right ear. And then they went on to play some test signals through all of these speakers that surrounded us. The idea being that if we can play a test signal through this speaker and through this speaker and through all the other speakers from those different locations and record them inside my ears, well, then we know how my head-related transfer function works. If you're unfamiliar with that concept, I've got plenty of videos on it. But it's the idea that when sounds come from different directions, first off, you've got an interaural level difference, where if a sound's over here, it'll be louder in this ear. You've got interaural timing differences, where if a sound's over here, it'll reach this ear slightly before reaching this ear. But then what makes it really immersive is the head-related transfer function, which you can think of as kind of an EQ curve that represents where something is coming from. So if something's right here, let's say that's just normal. And then if something's over here, it'll be going to this ear directly, but then there will be some sort of shading, some acoustic shadowing that happens over here that applies a curve to the sound. And that can be harnessed if you know what the transfer function is from different places. And that's what Sony was doing here. So they played these test signals, they recorded it from within my ears. They took that data, put it on their computer. I put the headphones on, and they were able to play music from the headphones that sounded really, really realistic. It sounded as if it was coming from the speaker. I know that there are lots of tools that do something similar, and it works for some people, it doesn't for others, because in those cases they're using a generic HRTF, a generic head-related transfer function. In this case, they measured mine, the one that I've grown accustomed to throughout, the last 30 years of being alive, which makes that experience even more immersive. So that was a really cool experience as well. So that was just the first 2 days, not to mention the actual convention where we've got companies from all over the world showing off their gear. And again, really cool people, including I got to sit down with one of the Audio University members, John, and we talked over coffee for an hour. It was a really cool experience. And I saw some other viewers, so if you're watching this, thanks for coming up and saying hi. On the last day, or the second to last day of AES, my friend Destin, this guy right here, he said, hey, you want to go check out the Power Station? And if you're unfamiliar with the Power Station / Avatar Studios, this is a legendary place. Really, really cool to have had the opportunity to go there. And as you can see, here's Studio A. This guy right here, he works there and was a former student of this group of students. So this guy was his teacher at one point in time. And Scott, this professor, welcomed me in with his group of students, and we got to check out this studio. Bob Clearmountain, if you know who this is, he did a lot of work at this studio. Many, many amazing legendary records have been done there. So they have really cool facility. As you can see here, it's very homey. Not only is it a really cool vibe visually and aesthetically, but it's also really cool vibe in terms of audio because of the acoustic properties of all of that wood. Yeah, it was a great trip. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Here's another photo of that particular tracking room. And then here's the other studio in that space. Awesome console. Yeah, just a really cool experience. And then finally, after leaving New York, I was able to go up to Connecticut to hang out with Professor Gabe Herman, who's a big part of our membership at Audio University. I was able to hang out with his students, which was a really cool experience. Here you can see that we did this workshop on acoustic guitar recording. We were able to get tips from Gabe Herman, who has a ton of experience, like 2 decades plus of experience recording and mixing. Has worked with some really cool artists. Let me open up this camera here. And we just experimented with the miking of an acoustic guitar. So not only was I able to be with Gabe at that point, but his students were here on the sides and they were able to ask some questions. So it was just a cool experience to be able to sit in and be a part of a college class again. And yeah, something I miss, learning with other people. This particular piece of content is going to be edited and put into our membership so that our members can see this workshop. So stay tuned for that. If you're a member, and if you're not a member, check out the membership. I'll throw that QR code on the screen one more time. Don't worry, it's up on the left, or top left part of the screen. Don't worry, I will continue making free videos for you if you're not interested in the membership. But if you are interested in taking that a little bit further, and again, being able to be a part of these group experiences where you can actually talk with other students and talk with the professors, please, by all means, click that QR code and see if it's something that would be right for you. So that was an awesome experience. That was part 1 of being at the University of Hartford. But then Professor Gabe Herman at the Hart School introduced me to another really cool person, Dr. Jasinski, over at the College of like Engineering. And he let me check out the anechoic chamber and reverb chamber, which I did a video with Neumann in Berlin, I think about a year ago. And you might recognize this kind of room, anechoic chamber. Now, what you're seeing here is a room that on all 6 sides is covered in these wedges that are about 2 feet deep. I think 2 feet, maybe even more. And what that does is it means that the floor, the walls, and the ceiling are as non-reflective as possible. They absorb so much of the energy that the camera audio in this sounds incredible. Like I can just unmute this, maybe you can hear it.
Sound isn't all that worth studying.
Oh, well, that was an interesting bite. That is definitely not what Dr. Jasinski was trying to say. I'm sure he was saying the opposite. Sound is worth studying because he's a huge fan of studying sound. But yeah, this room's really cool. It is used for testing. It simulates a free field. So it's kind of like if you had no walls or ceilings anywhere around you or floors and you played a speaker, the sound would just go infinitely in every direction, which gives you the opportunity to measure and analyze sound coming directly from the source without the need to worry about any indirect sound, or at least very, very, very little indirect sound. So that was cool. And not only that, I had been inside of an anechoic chamber before, but I had not had the chance to check out a reverb chamber. And I don't think I've got readily available that footage. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. So in this room, you can kind of see it. This is just the opposite. This is just hard reflective surfaces everywhere. I think it reflects 95% of the energy. So that was really cool. Both the anechoic chamber and the reverb chamber are extremely unsettling, because usually when you're in a room, you hear the direct sound and some indirect sound. So going into the anechoic chamber, where there's no echo whatsoever, is really startling, and it's unnatural and honestly unsettling. And then you go into the reverb chamber or the reverb room, and it's almost impossible to focus on what someone's saying because it's all indirect sound, or at least the direct sound and indirect sound are so close in level that it just seems really, really overwhelming. But okay, it was fun anyway. There's a reason I went there. It wasn't so bad, you know. You just don't want to spend too much time in those rooms. But it was fun to be there because the research that's done here is it's really incredible, the kind of things that they're studying. Everything from aero acoustics of aircraft to musical instrument acoustics. Just a really cool experience to talk to Dr. Jasinski and to learn from both he and Professor Herman. And as if that were not enough, again, extremely thankful that you and other viewers of Audio University have allowed me to make this what I do. It was just so cool. As if that weren't enough, then we went on to check out Telefunken, a microphone manufacturer. And we learned from Alan Venitosh here. Now, Alan is the operations manager over at Telefunken. And if you're unfamiliar with Telefunken, they have a website called Live from the Lab where you can download multitracks. So check that out. If you're interested in mixing, one of the best things you can do is record your own music and mix it. But then another great thing you can do is go download tracks where all of the instruments are separated. You just download the audio tracks and load them into your own DAW and start mixing. Telefunken makes that available for free. Plus, there are videos on their YouTube channel, just some really awesome performances by great musicians. So I'd highly recommend checking that out. But throughout this day, I mean, we were able to check out all sorts of different rooms within their facilities, talk to the people who do the work in designing and also the work in constructing. As you can see here, we're on the factory floor. We were able to learn about the soldering process. We were able to learn about the design and testing process. An amazing experience. Now this one, my plan is to edit this and make this a video, kind of like another field trip video, akin to what we did in the past with Ivana Manley and Dave Ratt. So, all right, let's get to some questions. I just kind of wanted to share that with you guys, and yeah, thank you for listening, and hopefully you'll find the edited videos really, really helpful. So I'm going through the questions now. Let's see what we've got. We've got one from there we go. Again, if you have questions, 3 question marks before and after. So right here, we've got one from Ken. What should a good recording of vocals with a condenser mic look like in terms of dB levels? It's a good question. So vocals are one of those things that can have some transients. One thing that is very much a transient instrument is a snare drum. But a vocalist can also have more sustained tones when they sing, which means that what we definitely don't want to happen is for peaks to go over 0 dB full scale in a digital recording environment. The reason is because digital works all the way up to 0 dB, but if you go past that even a little bit, it's going to basically take that smooth waveform and just chop off the top, which is not good. And, well, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes it's good, and sometimes people do it intentionally. There's nothing in audio necessarily that's always good or bad. But to get back to your question, Ken, I usually shoot for a level that hovers around -12 or -18 dB full scale. And what that means is that if my voice on the meter jumps up to -12, then at that point we've still got 12 dB of headroom for some of those really sharp transients, and also just when I get louder, as a vocalist gets closer to the mic, or as they just change their own dynamics, they may get louder. So it's a good practice to leave yourself some headroom. This used to not be such an easy task back in the days of tape, because with tape there's a lot of hiss. So if you just record nothing, the tape itself would have like a sound, right? And you want your signal to noise ratio to be as wide as possible. So that would mean that you'd want to get a little bit higher levels going to the tape, so that as opposed to recording your peaks here, you were able to record your peaks here, and the noise level stayed the same, and therefore there was more signal related to the noise. Now with digital audio, we started with, well, I don't know where we started, but like a CD, for example, is 16-bit depth, and that is what determines the digital noise floor. And most DAWs allow you to record at least to 24-bit depth with a fixed point. And that means that I think you've got a theoretical noise floor of like 144 dB. And that's a ton. I mean, that's so much. And with dither, you're able to push that noise to places where it's not that noticeable anyway. So to answer your question, I think -12 or -18 dB full scale is a good place to shoot. And if it's too low, you'll usually find that the digital quantization noise isn't an issue anyway, because there's just such a low noise floor. Where you might get more noise is actual room noise within your room, and like preamp noise and things like that. So it's best to get a good healthy level still, but don't worry about it too much, as long as you're getting around that -12, -18 dB full scale point. I think you'll be pretty good. So that's a whole topic. Sorry, I get on tangents, as you can see. So we'll move on to the next question. Mac from the membership says, how did I meet Dave Ratt? I met Dave Ratt through working in live sound. We did, I used to work for a company that would do both local rentals for concerts that would come through, but we would also do some rock festivals. And I think I met him at a festival called Rock on the Range. I'm not sure if that was the one. But yeah, he was working with Red Hot Chili Peppers, and they brought this big PA. And Dave is known for using a big Midas analog console. And it was a dream of mine to see him and hear him mix. And I was able to stand at front of house right behind him. I mean, not like too close. You know, I didn't want to be that guy. But I was in the front of house deck or tent. And yeah, Dave's such a cool guy. He was actually the very first interview that I ever did on Audio University. It was a remote interview. I just reached out to him on, I think, Facebook and told him what I was doing. Back then, I had less than probably 10,000 or even less than 1,000 subscribers. And he was like, hell yeah, man, I would love to. So since then, I've grown my subscribership, and I was out at the NAMM show last year in Anaheim, California. And Dave Ratt's company, Rat Sound, they are located in around the LA area, a little bit closer to the coast, northwest of LA. And he brought me in, and that time was a blast. I mean, you should check out that video if you like live sound, or if you like Dave Ratt's YouTube channel, which, again, that's something you should check out. Go to Dave Ratt's YouTube channel. He's really the inspiration for me. I always thought Dave Ratt, he's like the Bill Nye the Science Guy of audio. And you 90s kids out there know who Bill Nye the Science Guy was. It is. Dave inspired me to talk about audio nerd stuff and learn about how things work and test the limits of things. And I still learn from him every single time I'm out there. Really cool guy. You also had a question. Here we go. I'm going to click this. I may not know the answer to this, though. Do you recommend any best practices for collecting impulse responses from unique rooms, like number of mics or stereo recording techniques? Thank you. That's a really good question. I know the basic principle of collecting an impulse response would be that you would have a room, and you would have a source, and you would have a receiver. And the source is, let's say, a speaker, and the microphone could be a receiver. And you'd play an impulse through that, which ideally would be a direct function, which would contain all frequencies evenly for a really short period of time. So it'd be just, or a little bit longer, and the computer can kind of take samples of that. And what you'd be measuring is the frequency response of the room, similar to the transfer function I just described when measuring my ears. This time, the system under test isn't the room and your ears, it's the room itself. And then you would also be measuring the decay of each frequency. So then you can take that impulse and you can say, okay, we know that when you send this impulse into this room, it does this to these frequencies. Now let's take that information with a convolution reverb, and we will run a signal and do some convolution, which is a process that I can't possibly fathom at this point in my understanding. But I know that it's kind of like a multiplying the thing over time so that the instrument sounds as if it were in the room. Now, again, you're asking for best practices. I don't have much experience gathering these, but I know that a lot of people at AES do, and I've talked to some, and there are, I think, a lot of different practices. Some people keep the microphones close together. Some people put the microphones really far apart. Some people put them in different areas of the room. That has to do with wavelengths and the idea that maybe a microphone here won't hear this really long wavelength, but over here it will. And if you put them too close together, you might be in a null or a room mode. A node of the room modes. There are a lot of different variables, but that's a cool question, Jerome. And I'm sorry I don't have a better answer, but I totally appreciate where you're going with that. That's awesome. Got another question here. Let's see. How would you recommend getting good separation in a mix? I work with a PreSonus Studio Live 32. And I think it's a quality mixer. It is. However, the vocalists don't sound as good. Separation is a word that can mean a few different things. Separation could mean clarity. where you can separate each instrument with your mind's eye and kind of listen in to one thing or the other. And separation could also refer to stereo separation, which can be used to add clarity. So I think that there are a few ways you can pan things side to side. Now, a vocalist, you may not want to pan all the way to the side because that's often the main thing that is intended to be right up front in the stereo image. But I would recommend you just experiment. I wish I had a really hardcore answer for you. One thing that I can recommend is this idea of that I call complementary EQ, where let's say you're dealing with a kick drum and a bass that are occupying similar frequency ranges in the frequency spectrum. Well, if the kick drum is really prominent at its resonant frequency and the bass is playing some fundamental frequencies, then you may want to cut a little bit of, let's say, 100 hertz. That's completely just a thrown out there number. It'll be different every single time. And you may want to cut out that frequency range in one of those instruments and maybe even boost it a little bit in the other one, or vice versa. And again, the reason I don't have a great answer for you is because it's one of those things that's just situational. So I find it so much better to understand ideas that you can use in situations to figure out the answer for yourself. One such idea would be the idea of masking. If you haven't seen my video on masking, I'd recommend typing in to YouTube Audio University Psychoacoustics, and that will bring up a video I did on masking, which is the idea that instruments and frequencies, they can hide one another. And this is a psychoacoustic principle. It happens inside our ears and in our perception. So the idea that's really useful is not only that the same frequency can mask another frequency, another similar frequency in another instrument, but also the idea of the upward spread of masking, which means that frequencies and lower in the range will tend to not only mask frequencies around them, but mostly they'll mask higher frequencies in the spectrum. So if you're having an issue hearing the vocalist, for example, it may be that some lower frequency content, whether in the guitar or in the piano or the kick drum or the bass, maybe those frequencies are overrepresented and they're masking some of the vocalist. Alternatively, maybe some frequencies in the guitar within the same range of the vocal are stepping on the vocal. So these are things I'd recommend understanding. And then I think when you get back into mixing, hello there, I think you will see that that is going to help you say, oh, this kind of sounds like this instrument's stepping on that. And why would that be? Oh, I know that masking is a phenomenon. So perhaps maybe I can try to alleviate the masking by cutting some of this frequency range out of this instrument. Oh, and there we go. Making a cut here on this instrument really allowed for a lot more clarity on this other instrument. Just a tip. Let's see here. We've got one. It says, what should a good recording of vocals with a condenser mic look like in dB levels? That's Ken again. Sorry, that's a double. We already went over that, so if you have the same question, watch the replay or back up a little bit. How to deal with phase issues while surround mixing? That's a really good question. Gabe Herman, the guy I just talked about, he's really into immersive mixing, and I got to hear an Atmos system that's really well tuned and everything, really for the first time. I've heard some Atmos systems that have sounded great, but they've been in less than ideal situations, like on trade show floors or whatever. Gabe has he's gone to extreme lengths to tune his room with acoustic treatment, both diffusion and absorption, and it sounds really, really good. He's also gone through the process of EQing each speaker and using delay to make sure that all the sounds reach the listening position at the exact same time. And one thing that I thought, I won't say any specific mixes, but some of the mixes I know and love from like the 70s, were up on the speakers, and I just thought, man, this sounds kind of phasey. Like the vocal isn't right in the center like it is in that original stereo mix. And for me, that was really distracting. So maybe this is some of the problems. Oops. Let's get me on axis with this mic. Maybe that's part of the problem that you're having, Sharon. In order to fix those, like I said, I'm just kind of getting into Immersive, learning how it works, and I think that Professor Herman might be somebody that we'd want to talk to for tips on how to do that. He's a part of our membership, and this is a topic that people in our membership have shown interest in, so we'll probably talk about it sometime. So again, if you're interested in joining the membership, check out the QR code up here. But it's a little bit tough, just from my basic understanding of it, because what you're doing is you're not necessarily explicitly telling your system to put this much in the left speaker and this much in the right speaker like you would in a stereo mix with a pan pot. What you're doing instead is using objects, usually when you're mixing surround, or specifically when you're mixing object-based immersive audio. And what that means is it will ultimately be up to a renderer, whether it's a Dolby Atmos renderer or a Sony 360 Reality renderer, to actually figure out how those sounds go in the places that you're trying to put them. I do have a video on this if you're like, what the heck is he talking about? I did a video with one of the engineers from Steinberg, where you can actually put on headphones and hear things going around you with binaural technology. But the way that's possible, the way that the same mix can be played through 12 speakers, like a 7.1 sub dot 4 above you, the way the same mix can be delivered to, let's say, Apple Music, and it could be played on that speaker system and also through like AirPods. That's made possible because it's all object based. So we've got a bunch of objects, I think 120, 128 or something. And those are all audio tracks and metadata of where those things are in space. So it's really a challenge, I would imagine, because it's sort of a black box. Before, when we were doing mono or stereo mixing, you basically had control over what went where. Now we're starting to lose a little bit of control, but the benefit of that is that things can be more immersive, and it can adapt to the speaker system that the consumer or whoever's listening has. And I don't have a great answer for how to deal with phase issues, other than consider that if you're in a really well-tuned system, the speakers should be delayed such that the sound reaches you at the same time. So if you haven't delayed your speakers and tuned your system like that, make sure to do that, because by nature of phase, if your center speaker is close to you and your right speaker is a little bit further away, and you just don't apply any delay at all to those, then the sound's going to reach you at different times and there will be phase problems. But if you tune your system and calibrate it, that should be alleviated. And then as far as if you've done that and you're still dealing with phase issues, I'll just tell you, I think some of the best mixes out there have phase issues in them. And it's like, I think it's an issue that people are dealing with. I may not be the right guy to ask about this, because again, I'm just pretty much learning about immersive audio and the workflow behind it currently. But I would recommend looking into different phase alleviation techniques that apply to stereo. And if you haven't done a lot of mixing in stereo yet, I might recommend going back and doing that, and then moving into immersive mixing after the fact. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Thank you all for being here. Yep, I've gotten to these questions already. These questions of, like this one here, I have two speakers placed diagonally carrying 400 watts, low, mid, and 80 watts. And these are difficult to respond to on YouTube. I'll just be honest with you, because there are videos that I've got that have power calculations and attenuation over distance calculations that you can use. And I think it's best for you just to not use like my channel as a calculator, but to watch those videos and learn the math, which isn't that complicated. Like if I can do it, you can totally do it. And then just apply it, because then you're not going to need to come to me necessarily. You'll be able to do it yourself. So if you're looking for those videos, you can just type in Audio University inverse square law or Audio University amplifier power, things like this. And I think that'll be really helpful to you if you work in those areas of the industry. Ooh, this is an interesting question. Can I record mid-side with 3 cardioid mics? So for those who don't know, a mid-side technique would typically consist of 2 mics. There's one that's either a cardioid or an omnidirectional. That's the mid mic, and it's pointed directly at the source. And then you've got another mic that is actually turned perpendicular to that. That's usually it's always a bidirectional microphone. And the good thing about that is that you can record both of those things. You've got the mid mic and the side mic. You take the mid microphone, you pan it to the center, and then you take the side mic, you duplicate it, and you invert the polarity on one of those copies, and you pan them hard left and right. So now as a recap, what you've got is the mid mic, and then you've got a side mic with regular polarity from the microphone, and then another side mic with inverse polarity. And what that allows you to do is, by changing the difference between the mid and the side microphone and level, you're able to increase the stereo width or decrease the stereo width. Now what you're asking is, could you use a mid mic that's a cardioid and a left mic and a right mic that's a cardioid? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure, because I would guess that if you could do that, they would need to be the same mic, because you want the phase response to be the same. That way the interactions left and right with the mid mic will remain consistent. I would also guess that you would want to invert the polarity on one of those mics as well. I think, though, what you're going to deal with is, because a cardioid lobe is wider than either of the lobes in a bidirectional microphone, I don't know if it's going to work quite as well. But it's definitely worth trying out. So if you have 3 cardioid mics, please, by all means, try it out. Like, it doesn't hurt. And you would just, I think what you would do is have the mid microphone, as you normally would, panned in the center. And then you'd pan one of the mics to the left, one of the mics to the right, and then just experiment flipping the polarity on the other one. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it would work. You see, with a bidirectional microphone, it is sometimes like a AKG 414, for example. It's 2 cardioid microphones with inverse polarity. The issue, though, the thing there is that those are really, really close together. So sounds coming from the sides will almost be entirely canceled by them, because on one of them it's positive, on the other one it's negative. They're about as coincident as you could possibly make them, meaning that they happen, any sounds reaching them will reach them at almost the exact same time. Now, if you had to take 2 microphones and kind of like, because they're physical things, stack them on top of each other, that's going to make them a little bit less coincident. They'll still technically be coincident, as in like an XY pair, or mid-side is a coincident pair. But yeah, I think that's a creative idea, and I think you should try it. I've never done it, but I love where you're going with that. Very, very unique idea. How to first EQ. Oh, so this question, let me make sure. I'll answer it in 2 different ways. If the question is, how do you first get started EQing and using compression in a mix, I'd recommend checking out the new course that's available that Gabe Herman made. It's a shameless plug, I know. If the monthly membership price is too expensive for you, I've got videos on YouTube about compression and about EQ. But in the course he just made, he goes through a progression of, we did a whole month on EQ, a whole month on compression, and then a whole month on delay, and a whole month on reverb. So if you're new to mixing, or if you're advanced, I mean, this guy, Gabe, he's been mixing for 25 years, and you can definitely learn something from that. Now, if your question is, what do you do first, EQ or compression? That's a different thing. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to lie to you. It just depends. It may be frustrating to watch this. Like, man, he doesn't have a straight answer for anything. Well, it's because there's often not a straight answer. And I would just encourage you to think about it this way. If you have a very bass heavy signal going into a compressor, then the bass is going to be the thing that triggers the threshold of that compressor. So it may make sense, if you've got bass heavy thing going into a compressor, it may make sense to EQ that thing to remove some of that bass, so that other frequencies will trigger the threshold of the compressor instead. Okay? This is something that I learned by playing with guitar pedals. I would take an EQ and a compressor pedal, and I would play, and then I'd move them around, and I'd experiment with the difference with everything, including a distortion before or after a compressor, a reverb before or after anything else. And there's a lot that can be learned in doing that. Now, fortunately, you've got plugins too, so you can just put a compressor here, an EQ here, and experiment with compressing and then using the EQ to change the compressed signal. Or you can just drag that up and switch them around. So now you're EQing a signal that's going to go into a compressor. You can even experiment with doing an EQ that goes into a compressor that goes into an EQ, and just experiment with what each signal flow configuration and how it affects the mix. That is, the short answer is very, very high level engineers, and, well, I shouldn't say it that way. People who know what they're doing will probably end up doing it both ways in different situations. So I would just recommend trying it out and start to get an idea for how EQ and how frequency balance can impact the performance of a compressor, and then figure out the different ways that EQ can be used, whether it's for cleaning up and balancing. If you're going to clean up and balance, I might initially think to put that before a compressor. Or you could also use an EQ to kind of enhance things and bring out frequencies to bring it forward in a mix. And those kind of things might happen after a compressor. Once you've got the envelope and the harmonic character of the instrument, you can then run that into an EQ and sort of enhance that sound. Again, though, those aren't hard, fast rules. These are just places I might start. Okay? So the key concept in all these questions is, it depends, but it's helpful to learn the concepts behind these things so that you can make your own decision. And that's ultimately what I want to help everybody do. A question from the Facebook viewers: do you run a certificate program on live sound? I don't run a certificate program on live sound. Like, if it shouldn't need to be said, but Audio University is not an accredited university. It's just what I thought was a cool name. So we definitely can't give you any sort of like bachelor's degree. That's not something that Audio University does. We do have courses, and we do have courses coming out every single month through our membership. Again, that's not going to give you a certificate that is accredited by like the Department of Education or anything like that. I just want to be super upfront, because we are called Audio University, and that might mislead some people at first, but it should go without saying, the YouTube channel Audio University is not a full-on university. If you just want to learn more, check out the membership with the QR code. And really, if you just want to learn more, keep watching my videos. Knowledge, I'm trying to make it free for you. There is a benefit to working in a class environment, which is why I've made the membership. And then maybe someday I can get involved with some institutions and start to create some accredited content. But we haven't reached that point quite yet. It's a good question, though. And I appreciate your willingness to learn. One thing I'll say is you can do the Dante training. That's not offered by me, but you've got Dante level 1 and level 2, which will not only teach you about Dante, a very common protocol that's used in live sound, but it will also teach you generally about networking, like IP networking, which is something that's becoming really, really more popular in live sound and studios and all sorts of areas of our industry. So I'd check that out. Yeah, the Dante training. And then there's another one by Shure. I think that one's free too. Maybe search Shure audio certificate or something like that. I believe they put together a training that could be helpful. At the very least, you're going to learn stuff. And with something like Dante, that's something you can put on your resume. Dante level 1 and level 2 certified. And if you want to go on to the level 3, then you'll really know what you're talking about at that point. So yeah, Mac says he just watched the video with Dave Rat, and he says the subwoofers are so powerful they can catch fire. Yeah, for sure. It's not necessarily that the subwoofer is so powerful it can catch fire. It's that if a subwoofer is not capable of managing the current coming from an amplifier that's really powerful, then it can catch fire. So it's really that amplifiers can be so powerful they can catch things on fire, especially when those things move back and forth rapidly and create a lot of friction. So equally cool and intriguing, but it's just a different way of thinking about it. Let's see here. We've got another question. How do you ensure the audio quality is maintained throughout the recording and production process? I hear myself coming off and on axis of this mic, so I'm going to shift it over a little bit. There we go. That's a good question, and there are a few different considerations. First, you've got the idea of noise and signal-to-noise ratio. I was saying earlier, in the tape days, you had hiss, and so one way you ensured that you could keep the noise to a minimum while getting your signal well above it is to use principles of gain staging. So if I just ran a microphone straight onto a tape machine, you wouldn't even be able to hear it because it would be such a low level microphone signal printed to the tape that the noise is going to be considerably louder. But you could use a preamp, a gain stage. So the microphone hits the preamp and you can boost it up, and that's going to create a louder or a stronger recording to the tape. And now the noise in relation to that signal is a much better situation. And that happens in a lot of different ways. Anytime you're going to alter the level of a signal, you're altering not only the signal level, but all the noise that's been acquired previously in the signal chain. So you have room noise that hits the microphone, which means that when you gain up the preamp, the room noise is coming up as well. Okay, so that could even have something to do with your proximity to the microphone. If I get closer to this microphone, I get louder in the microphone, while the noise in the room stays the same level. So in that way, the signal-to-noise ratio is being extended, or it's growing larger as I get closer to the mic. However, you can hear that the tonality of my voice changes as I get closer to this mic because it's a directional mic, and that means it's susceptible to the proximity effect. Where when you get closer to the mic, you'll see a bass boost. Now, another consideration in addition to noise could be a compressor. If you decrease the loud parts and bring everything up, now your signal-to-noise ratio is decreasing as well. So a compressor is another gain stage when you use makeup gain, right? Speaking of compression, another thing aside from noise is distortion. When you use a compressor, you are changing the envelope of the signal and you're changing the shape of the waveform, which means that you're going to be introducing some harmonic distortion. This is something that Professor Gabe Herman talked about in our course, the Mixing Essentials course. Again, that's available in the membership if you're just joining us. The noise, though, we have this thing, total harmonic distortion, and that's one number that represents the amount of harmonic distortion introduced by a signal chain. But that's not always a bad thing. So what's much more helpful is to understand that noise can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can, I'm sorry, not noise. Well, noise can be too. But distortion can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can be distortion, like sometimes clipping could introduce distortion, digital clipping, and sometimes that's bad. But sometimes that's good. And you could be analog distortion, where you, like a guitar, for example, you run a signal really hot into the preamp stage of a guitar amp, and that introduces distortion. That can be bad. It initially wasn't the way those guitar amps were intended to be used, but it turns out that it's kind of cool. So we've continued doing that for decades at this point, running too loud of a signal into a gain stage and creating saturation and harmonic distortion along the way. So yeah, I would consider noise. I would consider distortion. What else? I would consider loss. If you have a really long cable, you can start to have a decrease in the high frequency content, which could make it sound dull. Not always a bad thing. I don't know anybody who just runs thousands of miles of cable just for that. It may make more sense to just use an EQ. But it's something to consider if you are sending audio from one place to a really far location. Now, I made a video on this. You can search, I think, Audio University cable length. Maybe that'll help you find it. But again, in that video, we proved that with balanced audio, it takes a lot of cable to have a noticeable difference. But yeah, I might be forgetting something here in terms of ensuring the audio quality is maintained throughout the recording and production process. But that's the name of the game, I suppose. So just be aware of those things and potentially even some other things. So, hey, Jerome, happy to help. I'm glad that my answer was helpful, even though it was kind of like, I'm not sure. I'm glad that it was beneficial. Do drums have the same frequency response when pitched as opposed to... I don't understand your question. Let me read this again. Do drums have the same frequency response when pitched higher as opposed to pitched higher as a sample? It depends. So frequency response may not be the right word here, because frequency response is like with headphones. It's like when I send a signal in, how does it respond to that signal across the frequency spectrum? With a snare drum, with a drum, you are hitting it and creating kind of an impulse, and then it'll create frequencies. But I guess, so it is kind of a okay term to use if I think about it a little bit. But I would think about it more as, are the frequencies of the instrument going to change, or is the frequency of the instrument going to change when I pitch it? And yeah, I mean, for sure, because that's what pitching is. You're going to change the frequency. If you pitch something higher up, that means that you're shortening the wavelengths. That means that you're increasing the frequency. If you're pitching something down, you're going to lengthen the wavelengths and therefore decrease the frequency. So yeah, definitely. The frequencies are one and the same with pitch modulation. Hey, look at that. We got one of my best buds on here. Loved the impulse response answer. Don't sell yourself short. Went to college with this guy. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you, man. When I first started this channel, I asked Andrew, I said, do you think this is a good idea? And he said, dude, I don't know, but if anybody can do this, it's you. And that really stuck with me. So thanks, man. I appreciate you. Thank you, Jackson. I'm glad everybody, not everybody, but I'm glad some people get value out of my videos. Let's see. We have any other questions? Remember, put 3 question marks before and after your question so I can see it's a question. Oh, here's a good question. I like this. It didn't have 3 question marks, but I caught it anyway. It says, is clipping the master channel detrimental to my finished project? I'm hitting -7 to -6 LUFS, which is loudness units, full scale. Very clean, dynamic enough, not squashed. I'm hitting +7 dB full scale. Is this an issue? It's a good idea to leave some headroom in your mix. Now, that can be done after the fact, I believe, because most DAWs are using a floating point system as opposed to a fixed point system, which means that, like, yeah, you could, like, overdrive every meter in your session, and the signal integrity would still be maintained because the DAW is kind of like changing the window of perspective. But I think it's a good idea to use the meters as actual tools. Don't just ignore them. In my opinion, if you're at +7 dB full scale on your master meter, the meter's just pinned and it's just a solid red light, and therefore, like, why do you even have a master meter? So I think that it's best to use the master meter as a gauge of how much headroom your final render will have, even if that means taking all the faders and moving them down a little bit, equally proportionally across your session, so that the master meter actually does something. And the reason you want to know if you are above or how far below you are from 0 dB full scale, that very top point, I mean, there are many reasons, but usually a streaming platform like Spotify or like Apple Music, even if it's lossless, I believe, they're going to have some sort of compression format. Now, not dynamic range compression necessarily, but data compression. And that means that it's going to go through some sort of codec where the sound that you send will be, I guess it'll be, I don't know, codec. I'm trying to remember. It's something decode. Encoded. It'll be encoded for delivery to the listener. And through that encoding process, there can be a decrease of headroom. So it's a good practice to leave a little bit of headroom at least, whether it's whether it's -0.1 dB full scale or -1 dB full scale. It's a good idea to leave some headroom in there so that that process doesn't distort your mix. Okay. So, what was your question exactly? It says, is this an issue? It can be. And I think the issue is that if you're doing that, you're not really using the master meter to do anything. So I would recommend staging or using gain staging practices throughout your mix, even though you don't necessarily have to. Like, why wouldn't you? Because the software is intended to be used so that the meters give you meaningful information. You know what I mean? I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Here's a question. Please explain the concept of SPL and how it can be used in a room or hall. So I would recommend checking out my video on decibels. So you can search Audio University decibels, and the newer one is what I'd watch. There are 2 versions. But how it can be used in a room or hall, it kind of confuses me, and here's why. dB, decibels, that's just a ratio. So you can have dB SPL, you can have dBu, You can have dB full scale. Like in the example of dB full scale, the reference point is 0 dB. So minus 18 dB full scale is 18 decibels lower than 0 dB full scale. dB always needs a reference, okay? I think dBu has to do with voltage. I think, what else do we have? Yeah, let's just go to dBSPL. So you might ask, what then is the reference point for dBSPL? And the reference point for dBSPL is 0 dBSPL, which is the quietest sound that humans can hear. Now, it's likely that we all have a different threshold of hearing, which is that quietest sound. But based on some research, we have this set point that is 0 dB SPL. And that means that if we've got a signal that's 70 dB SPL, it's 70 decibels louder than the threshold of hearing, than the quietest sound humans can hear, right? There are also weightings. So like WEIGHT. There can be dBSPL A weighted, dBSPL C weighted. And those, I won't go too far into it, but that's an important concept to be aware of. The way it can be used to understand a room, or the way it can be used in a room or hall, the first thing that comes to mind is just if I'm in a room and I'm X amount of feet away from the source, over distance, we're going to lose 6 dB every time you double the distance, okay? So if that's in a theoretical situation with no walls or anything, but because some indirect sound can be reflected and summed together, right? But in a free field, let's say we're in an anechoic chamber, like the one I visited at the University of Hartford last week, you can measure at 6 inches, it'll be, let's say, 90 dB. And if you go to 12 inches, a doubling of that distance, it's going to be 6 decibels lower. So that's one way you can use it. You can use it to understand how sound is attenuated over distance. You can also use dBSPL to figure out if it's safe for somebody to be listening to your mix in a room or a hall. If it goes over a certain level of decibels for a certain amount of time, then you should probably turn it down a little bit, or everybody should be wearing earplugs. And sadly, that's rarely the case. It's usually the case that it's too loud, that it becomes dangerous, and it's rarely the case that most people are wearing earplugs. But you can do that. Since you're an audio person, you love music, I would highly recommend maybe even using your phone and saying, oh, it says it's dangerous. It's a higher dB SPL level. It's loud, so much louder than the threshold of human hearing that it could be dangerous to my hearing. I'm going to put headphones in, or earplugs in. So that's a way you could use it. Ooh, let's see. I have an exam tomorrow on microphones. Mic placement techniques, stereo, and surround placement. Your videos helped a lot. Just came here to say thanks. That makes me very happy. I remember my exams on those very concepts in college, and I wish YouTube was what it was today. So I'm glad I didn't mislead you, and I'm glad that you are taking this seriously and studying before your exams and acing the exams, hopefully. All right, 3 question marks before and after. I'll go for a little bit longer here. Reading through these. Again, I appreciate everybody for being here. This has been really fun. Here's a good question. I'm transitioning from touring. He's got married 2 weeks ago. Congratulations. Expecting your first child. Congratulations. Nice. What is your outlook on where audio education is going? Are brick and mortar schools still viable? I think so, especially after my experience last week at the University of Hartford. Are they for everybody? No, because some people can't afford them. So if that's you, I don't necessarily recommend you do something you feel uncomfortable doing, um, just to go to school. Not financial advice. I got to put my YouTube disclaimer, right? Not financial advice, but I think that they do have value. I've actually put a lot of thought into this. This is one of the main reasons I've created my membership. So first, let me say that you can get things from a brick and mortar school that you definitely can't get from YouTube, and that you also can't get from my membership, such as the facilities, right? So Audio University membership doesn't have facilities like big SSL consoles and a huge mic locker and a team. Well, we do have that. But what you can get from a university and our membership is teachers that know how to teach. That's something that we take really seriously. We select teachers that know how to teach the concepts. They do the same thing at most schools. Some of the best teachers I've ever had were at my school when I was studying audio production. You also get access to other people, and that's really critical. Not only is it better to learn in a group environment because you're able to ask questions of the professor, but it's better to learn in a group environment because you get to hear the questions that other people are asking. And you also get to ask and share your results with the other students. So these things are really critical, and this is the reason why I've made the membership. There's a QR code up here if you're interested in learning more. We wanted to make it so that it's not just me showing up on your screen with random content every week on a different subject. We've created quite a library at this point, but there's still something to be said that watching more videos doesn't necessarily make you better, right? You need theory that comes with the videos. You need practice. You need to actually take the information you learn in the video and apply it to a project. You need feedback where you can take the concepts you've learned from the theory and ask questions to make sure you're understanding it correctly. Otherwise, you could develop bad habits. But you can also use that feedback as feedback on your work, because it's one thing to learn and apply and say, I think I did pretty well. I think I'm getting better. You can do it that way, but it's going to accelerate your learning if you're getting feedback from your peers and from your instructors and mentors on your mixes. And then, so you got theory, practice, feedback, and community. And I think that community part is really important, because one of the best ways to learn, I was talking to a engineer, Carl Napa. He was saying that there's so much value in talking about audio to people, like even just talking about how things sound. You listen to a record and you say, hey, I hear this bass. It sounds almost like you hear that finger snap, or you hear that airiness from the bass compression. These things help you see, wow, actually, yeah, I do understand. Or maybe you can help somebody else see something. Or if you're with a mentor, you can say something and the mentor will hear it and maybe change the way that you look at that thing. It's that community element of thinking through problems, hearing things, discussing it. It's really important. So, long answer again. That's the only way I roll. Yeah, I mean, I think brick and mortar schools are still viable. It just depends on resources, on your intentions. Is it absolutely needed? Not necessarily, but I was sitting at AES in a panel where they were talking about starting your career in audio, and there's a lot of people trying to do that. And you try to think, well, how do I set myself apart? I mean, you can set yourself apart with a reel, or a portfolio of work you've done. But everybody else at the highest levels has that too. And one thing you can add to the resume to set yourself apart is, I have a certification in this. Whether it's a free certification online like Dante Training I mentioned earlier, or whether it's a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science at this or that school, or associate's degree with a focus on this, or some sort of trade school, or whether it's a master's degree or a doctorate in acoustics. These things have meaning in certain contexts. So yeah, good question. Again, it's not such a cut and dry answer. And with these things, everybody, I could sit here and try to give you an answer that's like, all right, that's definitive, that's it, it's no other way. But you know me. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know me. That's not my style. I feel like I'd be doing you a disservice if I tried to say yes, definitely, on anything. Because you're sort of missing the point at that point. Audio is so much about finding new ways to do different things. This is a good question. Would you start your mix by putting an SSL bus compressor on the master channel? I personally would not. I have heard a lot of people that would. What he's saying is there's a common technique to use SSL compression on the master, and that's something that can be used to like add glue to a mix, right? Where you just are hitting that compressor and it's kind of solidifying or creating coherence in the mix. And I would definitely consider adding that. I shouldn't say definitely. I would consider using SSL bus compression on the master. Me personally, I don't like the idea of mixing into it because that's just not what I'm used to. A lot of my mixing experience is in live sound, and that's a situation where you might do that. But I like to do things for reasons. So if you've not listened to what an SSL bus compressor does to a full mix yet, I'd recommend doing that first. Maybe build a mix and then put an SSL bus compressor on it and experiment with like, all right, when the levels are this way, things sound like this. That way, as you get into your next mix and as you do hundreds of mixes, you can grow accustomed to what to expect. And then you can just like maybe work a little bit faster by starting with it in there anyway. But I would only recommend doing that once you know how things will behave in a full context. I hope that makes sense. Definitely don't just put it there because that's what you heard you should do. You should definitely understand what it's going to do before even thinking about using it. And again, I think the best way to do that is to take a full mix that is ready for master bus compression and experiment with what that does, rather than just saying, okay, like here's kick drum and now let's turn it up and it's already hitting the compressor. You know what I mean? I think it's something that takes experience to start with it. But the way you get that experience is maybe by experimenting prior. Hope that is a satisfying answer for you. Yeah, this is a cool question. What are different... Well, I'm reading this as, what's the difference between rectangle, triangle, and noise shaping, which to use? I have a video on saturation that you might find is a good introduction to this concept of... well, you're saying noise shaping. I think you mean wave shaping, unless I'm just like missing the point here. Because with saturation, like I mentioned earlier, you're changing the shape of a waveform. And when you do that, you change the harmonic character of the sound. And related to that is the idea of a certain harmonic character can be associated with like a square wave or a triangle wave or a sawtooth wave. And yeah, I think that's where you're going with this. If not, my apologies. But I'd recommend checking out Audio University Saturation and check out that video. And then beyond that, check out some other YouTube channels that get a lot more into like wave synthesis. That's something I haven't really touched on in any videos, but it's a really cool concept for anybody, and it's an essential concept if you find yourself using modular synthesis and synthesizers, you know. All right. Reading through these. Will a Behringer wing rack be the next big thing? I think it's a cool thing. I think having an iPad to control a console that's in a rack is something that's existed for a little while. And at the highest levels, I think people are going to want a really nice control surface. It's just better to have that. And if you have the resources to have a control surface and to like move it, put it on a big truck and move it and then like set it up, I think that'll continue to be the way things are done. But having iPad control of something is really useful because you're not always, especially in smaller budget shows or shows where there's a high budget but visual aesthetics are prioritized, you're not always able to have your console at front of house. So having an iPad allows you to put your console over there and mix from the audience. And if you don't even really use the console that's at the side of the stage, why not make it just a rack unit device and keep it there without the need for that expense and without the need to take up that space and only mix from an iPad. And there are options for all those things. So, cool question. I think it's a cool product. Yeah, just saw that at AES. Which books do you suggest? There is a video that has some essential like text books for learning. If you learn from books, go check out that video, Audio University books. But one of them includes Yamaha's Sound Engineer Handbook. I think Sound Reinforcement Handbook. One for mixing I really recommend is Bobby Owsinski's The Mixing Engineer's Handbook. Andrew, if you're still watching this, the guy I knew from college and one of my best friends, when we learned that from our professor, or when we were introduced to that book, we were like, man, this is helpful. Because it really does a good job of walking the line of not prescribing, do this to your vocals every time, but it still gives you some ideas and it still gives you kind of a framework to work within. So yeah, I would highly recommend Bobby Owsinski's books, specifically Mixing Engineer's Handbook. And then I'm reading This Is Your Brain on Music. That's a really cool book. It's not really going to teach you about mixing, but if you love music and stuff, I'm excited to get through this one. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your time here. I'm going to keep going, but let's just see. 73 viewers right now. Nice. I hope that means you're getting some value out of this. Sorry I don't have a video for you today. It kind of crushed my soul a little bit to have to skip a week after so many weeks of not skipping. But yeah, I wanted to jump on here to give you some help and value anyway. And also we've got a new course in the membership, and I wanted to promote that because I think what Gabe Herman did with that is really, really, really helpful. And as I've mentioned several times throughout this stream, if you do become a member with the QR code up here, you'll get access to that course immediately. But Gabe, the instructor of that course, he's in the membership. So you can ask him questions. You can get like halfway through one lesson and say, I didn't really understand that. At Gabe Herman, can you help me understand this? Am I understanding this correctly? I think if you want to learn mixing essentials, EQ, compression, delay, and reverb, I think you'll definitely find value out of that. And I think it's extremely affordable for what you get in that course. I think that it's like not bad at all. Not bad at all. Okay. Great comments in here, by the way, of just sharing. They're not questions, but you're kind of like helping the community, so I really appreciate that. I think we've got a pretty good group of people who watch our videos, and I'm proud and thankful that our culture as a community is healthy. Oh, this isn't a question, but yeah, 18i20 is an awesome interface. Yeah, it packs a big punch, and they just, I think, upgraded that to the um, fourth generation over at Focusrite. I've got one right here that's a third generation, and although I've upgraded to different interfaces for a variety of reasons, I can still use this as a 8-channel preamp because it has ADAT out. And so that's something to consider um, if you start with. I mean, you can get a long way with this. Don't get me wrong, but if you ever should upgrade your interface and you get an interface that has ADAT inputs, you can always use this as a preamp, and it's just like not a waste of money. You know what I mean? You don't have to just throw it away. So that's why one of the main reasons I like the 18i20. In addition, just the fact that it lets you use 8 preamps, which is helpful, especially if you're recording a full band or a drum kit, something like that. Ooh, this is a great question. Okay. What is a cable, a signal flow configuration for having an electric guitar amp in a separate room far from the stage? So, the issue with guitars and other instruments and long distances is that guitars operate as a high impedance device. Okay, and they're supposed to be plugged into high impedance inputs. That's a better way of saying it. They're intended to be used with high impedance inputs. An amp has a high impedance input. So you could take a guitar cable straight from the guitar to the amp, and so long as it's below about 15 feet, you're going to be fine, because that's going to be a high impedance, unbalanced connection. Okay. If you need to put the amp more than 15 feet away, you are going to want to use some sort of low impedance, balanced connection. And there are specific tools used for that. You could, for example, use a DI box and then connect that to a reamp box. And then there'd be just an XLR cable between there that could be 500 feet if you wanted it to be. Reamp boxes are specifically made for that purpose. But if you just have 2 passive DI boxes, a reamp box is kind of like a passive DI box in reverse. And you can use a passive DI box in reverse. So you could theoretically plug your guitar into a passive DI box the way you normally would, and then take the XLR out of that, run it to another DI box, but you're going to plug that into the opposite end, and then the input of that will be sent to the amp, right? Because a DI box is basically just a transformer. A passive DI box is basically just a transformer that has an input and an output, and usually the input is high impedance, 1/4 inch, like an instrument cable, a TS cable, and the output is generally XLR. But if you use some adapters, you can go this way through the transformer or that way through the transformer to convert between high impedance and low impedance and balance the signal along the way. So, yeah, you could do that. I think that answers your question. You can do that in the studio. That's much more common. But if you're trying to get, I guess, stage noise down, that's a creative idea, and I think it would work. You just mic the amp with a mic in the other room. Kind of cool. All right. Still here. I'm just reading. Can't read and talk at the same time. This is a cool question. Suggest which one should be used, either aux-fed subwoofer or matrix group subwoofer for live mixing. I have a video on, search Audio University mixer outputs. I think that we'll find that video for you. And I talk about what is a matrix, what is an aux. The way that was explained to me, just for people watching, is that you've got channels, and these are like kids who are going to get on a school bus, okay? And then you've got an aux, which is like the school bus. Channels go to the aux. It could also be like a bus, a bus. The channels get on the master bus or something, right? The channels get on group 1. There are these buses that contain channels. And then a matrix, you can think about that as like a ferry that goes across a river, right? It carries a bus that contains kids. A matrix contains buses that contain channels, okay? And on some consoles, especially digital consoles, you can often send a channel straight to a matrix, but it's helpful to understand it as you send channels to buses and you send buses to matrices, okay? And the question here is, should I run my subs just off of the master bus, or should I set up an aux that would allow me to say, okay, I only want kick drum in the sub, but I'll keep the aux send for the vocal all the way down. I don't want that in the sub. Or should I perhaps create a matrix that contains the master bus and an aux? And there's a lot of different considerations here. One of the main advantages to using a matrix is that you can send buses to it. Another advantage is that on a lot of consoles, you're able to use delay on a matrix when maybe delay isn't possible on an aux, okay? So one reason that on some consoles I would use a matrix to feed the sub would be that you can then use the delay on the matrix to make sure that the main speakers and the subs are aligned in are phase aligned at the crossover frequency, okay? You could also use like front fills on a matrix and then use the delay to make sure that they're time aligned to the main speakers. One thing I want to make you aware of, though, I think it's a good idea to not send stuff to the sub that doesn't need to be sent to the sub. That's how I do it. So I will either use an aux or a matrix when I'm working in live sound. But one thing to consider is that if you have like a master fader for that aux, or let's say if you have a aux bus fader that feeds the sub, or if you have the output fader for the matrix that feeds the sub, and you've got the mains being fed by this fader and the subs being fed by this fader, you can bring them up and down without experiencing many issues. But if you move the sub fader up in relation to the main fader or down in relation to the main fader, think about a crossover. You've got, I'm backwards I think here from your perspective, but you've got a crossover that will have like high frequencies. Here, let's say, I'll do it backwards. This is low frequencies, okay? And this is high frequencies. So we're going to use a low pass filter to feed the subs, so we're not sending high frequencies to the subs. And we're going to use a high pass filter to feed the mains, so we're not sending low frequencies to the mains. And when those filters overlap, that's the crossover frequency, okay? Now, here's our two filters. God, this is sketchy. This is why I make illustrations for my videos. If you just turn up the sub, you just move the crossover frequency. This was explained to me by my professor Lee Buckaloo. So it's like, it's helpful, but you can kind of get into some trouble, because if you spend a lot of energy making sure that things are phase aligned at the crossover frequency, and that the crossover frequency allows the subs and the mains to sum together to create a nice flat response, and then you go boosting the sub, you kind of undo some of that. Like you move the crossover point because you're changing the amount of summation at different frequencies. I hope that makes sense. All right. Here's another one. Let's see. Yeah, this is a great question. As an engineer that just joined the audio community in less than 2 years, What are the essentials I need to learn to keep up with the current trend in the audio industry? Um, that's a good question because things are changing a little bit now. But I want to encourage you first that a lot's changed in audio, but really it's the same stuff at the basis of it all for the most part. So if you understand signal flow and troubleshooting, these are really important things to know. Okay? If you understand the basic principles of acoustics, direct sound, indirect sound, attenuation over distance, these are important things to know, and they're never going to change. How a speaker works, how a microphone works, how microphones behave when you change the placement. Really, probably not, excuse me, it's probably not going to change. Okay. Some things that have started to change, like a lot of things are networked now. So I would recommend getting a basic understanding, at least, of audio networking with IP, and just really of IP networking in general. You don't have to know that much, depending on what you're doing. I know a bare minimum, I would say. But yeah, check that out. I've got a video on that. That's Audio University Space Networking. You could probably search that on YouTube and find it. Dante level 1 and level 2 certification is helpful for that. Another thing that's kind of changing is I've done videos on these, like the plugin Gulfos by Sound Theory, and the plugin Soothe and Bloom and Spiff by OX Sound. These are kind of new, man. It's not necessarily just understand how an EQ works and then you're good, or understand how a compressor works and you're good. These are unique plugins. These things, when I sat down to make a video on them and try to teach something, it was a challenge because I had to learn something entirely new myself. Because what you'll see is that DSP is being used in a way now that does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. And in my opinion, that used to be kind of a frustrating thing because it was just a knob, like a loud knob, or like a one knob plugin that just does what it does. And that kind of frustrated me because I often felt that I wanted more control. But then as I started using these plugins that I just mentioned, these things can give you a lot of control. They can do a lot of things that would take a ton of work to do if you had full control over it, right? So it'll understand the signal coming in, and it'll adjust things in a way that would just take hours and hours and hours, and would probably be impractical for a human to actually use regular traditional tools to do. So when things like that come out, I think it's at least worth downloading a free trial and trying it out and seeing how those things work. And then, of course, AI is something that we're not immune from. So if you're trying to keep up with the new trends, I would start with those things. And just know that if you can troubleshoot and you understand signal flow and gain staging, you're going to be all right. You're going to be okay. And more importantly, if you have a good taste for feel and music and things like that, you're going to be okay. Will AI take over the world? Maybe. Will you be okay there? I hope so. I hope we're okay. But yeah, I think that learning the basics, it will take you further than you might expect. All right, new questions. I'm going to go for, I've almost been doing this for, I think, 2 hours. So my voice is starting to go. All right. Yeah, Jennifer, absolutely correct. Bobby Osinski, that has an O in it, by the way, for people who are going to search this, OW. Yeah, he lays it out. He's a really good writer and teacher. Highly recommend checking out his stuff. This is a question. I already clicked the button to bring it up on screen because it's going to take me forever. These kind of questions, they petrify me because there's so many cool pieces of gear. Let's see. Coolest piece of gear. From starting out now, what's the most excited I've ever been acquiring a specific piece of gear? Acquiring acoustic treatment, I think, for me, has been the biggest deal. I mean, you don't have to go as crazy as I did here, and I can continue to improve my system that I've got set up. But for me, acoustic treatment has reinvigorated my passion for music because I've got sweet speakers, I've got a great DA converter, and that stuff can exist in a space that's acoustically treated now. So when I go back and I play my favorite mixes from Steely Dan or from Fleetwood Mac or new stuff, Billie Eilish, or, you know, random access memories from Daft Punk, when I play these things on my speakers now with acoustic treatment, yeah, it's awesome. So that's something. It's kind of like the feeling of putting nice headphones on and listening to your favorite music. It just gets you excited about it again. Oh wow, there's reverb that I didn't realize before, and now it's just the clarity and everything. It's just so beautiful, and it gets me excited to listen to music. Just sometimes I'll just sit here and chill, pour a glass of whiskey or water or whatever, tea, you know, and just enjoy. It's fun. Hey, I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to share that with me. Glad to help. Definitely glad to help. Okay. Let's see a few more questions we can get here. It's been really fun hanging out with everybody. Wish maybe next time I'll utilize the ability to get people up on camera with me with microphones and everything, so we can actually hang out and talk to each other. It's one thing to do it through the through comments. It's entirely different to do it face to face, and that is something we do in our community pretty regularly. Is we get on live streams and you can jump up. We'll do mix reviews where you can submit your mix, and we'll have an expert who's been mixing for 20 years plus get on. They'll listen to your mix and they'll give you feedback that's really custom for you. But then we also just have a monthly topic review live stream where people jump on, we ask questions, we share what we learned that month. Really good time. So I like live streaming. I was scared to do it for a while, and now I'm starting to get into it. So how are you sounding so good on this live stream? What setup are you using to achieve this? The acoustic treatment's the biggest part, because right now all I have, this is just a small diaphragm condenser mic. Maybe I can, yeah, there it is. So that's the mic, and it's really a pretty cheap mic. It's a Sennheiser small diaphragm condenser that I just started throwing up there recently. But the reason it sounds good is because it's far away from me, not too far, but it's at a natural distance where you might hear me speak if we were actually sitting here in the room. Like, you know, you see a lot of these Shure SM7Bs really close to people, and that gives you like that proximity effect that we're kind of growing accustomed to, because a lot of people are putting dynamic mics or any kind of mic right up next to them, and that gives you a lot of signal to noise ratio, as I mentioned, and it kind of gives you like the radio DJ sound. To be clear, you're not hearing this microphone; it's not even plugged in. Although, no, I don't have an XLR. It's in my bag from my trip. But yeah, you can get a good sound here, especially if you have a lot of room noise or a lot of echo in your room. Getting a mic closer to you is going to probably be the best bet. But then as you add acoustic treatment, it gives you the ability to get a little bit more distance from the microphone. And that's what we've got here. It's just right above me. I could use a shotgun mic if I wanted. I'm just using a regular old cardioid mic. I think ideally I'd probably use like a super cardioid small diaphragm condenser that's not a shotgun. because my room is such that it sounds pretty good, and it won't be overly echoey. So that's how it's really just that. I'm not doing any sort of compression or any sort of EQ whatsoever. However, I could if I wanted to. And let me share this with you real quick. So I use an RME interface. Lots of different interfaces have different ways of doing this sort of thing. I have used RME because I think it's really good, especially for the content creation stuff I do. Right now, I have input or output 1 and 2 looping back to the input of YouTube or Facebook or whatever. And I've just got my mic right here. So if I turn this down, it takes me out of the mix. And if I turn it up, it puts me in the mix. I could potentially go even further and turn on the EQ and use like a high pass filter or something like that. I could boost a certain frequency. Probably wouldn't want to boost this one because this sounds terrible. Or I could cut a frequency. I could also use dynamics, where I'm using an actual compressor. So I can turn down the threshold and turn up the ratio a little bit. And that would allow me to compress my voice. I choose not to do that because I like a natural sound. You know, I'm not necessarily dealing with any other elements where I would need to decrease the dynamic range of my voice. I think voice comes through pretty easily on a live stream. But yeah, this is how I'm doing it. And like, long story short, like, you could do the same thing. You could get the exact same sound quality, like, pretty much with any interface and mic with acoustic treatment, you know, because it's, although you see all this stuff on my screen, what you're actually hearing is the mic going directly into the interface, going directly to the live stream. I'm not even really utilizing any of this. This is useful though, because if I have multiple people, or I've got different screen sharing setups, or I want to make a screen capture of some kind, all this routing capability is really nice. But in terms of sound quality, just plug your mic into your interface, get a good level, and then play with distance from the microphone. Too far away, it might get a little bit roomy sounding. Too close, it becomes less roomy sounding, but you might get a little bit too much proximity effect. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, about 12 more minutes. We'll do this here. Again, I appreciate everybody being on the stream. If you're interested in learning more about the membership, you got the QR code up there. Very, very thankful for my experiences last week at AES. As a reminder, check those out, those resources I showed you. You got AES. This is a international volunteer-based organization for our industry, Audio Engineering Society. Your local section may host meetings, so you don't necessarily have to go to New York and pay for a flight and a hotel, which costs a lot of money. You can go down the street in many cities and meet with the audio engineers and network with them and learn from them, and really just like be around people who actually care about your new studio or your mix, because Lord knows not everybody really cares. If you've ever tried talking to somebody about it who doesn't care, you know that very well. And then, hey, audio student, I would feel terrible if I didn't just mention John Krivet's Facebook group, because that's really what kind of started my journey toward AES and meeting people and getting opportunities to just be a member of this industry to a level that I never was before. So I'd highly recommend joining that, even if you're just a beginner, or if you're advanced. Like, it's a lot of really important and talented and kind people are in this group, and it's a great way to network. So we'll do a few more questions here. Looking for those question marks. Okay, this one seems complicated. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer it, but we'll try. Hi, Kyle. My vertical tangential room mode, right at my listening position, makes a null at 103 hertz when being in the middle of the floor and ceiling. Given that the height is unchangeable, short, how do you treat it? So first off, it's important to understand what tangential room mode means. An axial room mode is usually the most concerning, and that's a resonance that occurs in a room between two surfaces. So your room will have several axial room modes between the front and back wall. It will have several axial room modes between the floor and ceiling and between the side walls. And then as you get into tangential, this is modes between more surfaces. So I believe tangential is 4 surfaces. Yeah. So it would be like the floor, the wall, the floor, the wall, the ceiling, the other wall, the floor, a resonance, a resonance that occurs between those 4 walls. So yeah, if yours is happening at 103 hertz, I would recommend using some acoustic treatment. The issue is that 103 hertz has a pretty big wavelength. So I'm going to search sound wavelength. Here, I'll share this with you. Sound wavelength, 103 hertz. The reason it's important to know the sound wavelength is because wavelength is a function of, it's related to frequency and speed. You know what I mean? So like the wavelength of a 4 hertz light wave is going to be a lot longer than a 4 hertz sound wave because light travels way faster. Okay? So sound with a frequency of 103 hertz would have a wavelength of approximately 3.3 meters. Okay? So I'm going to bring up a calculator here. Or am I? Why didn't that work? Here we go. So here's a calculator. So if the wavelength of 103 hertz of sound is 3.3 meters, then a quarter of that wavelength is about 0.83 meters. Okay? And the reason I care about a quarter wavelength is because you can only use a porous absorber, like your typical acoustic panel. You can only use that in areas of a lot of velocity. Okay? So it's kind of hard to explain. I would recommend watching one of my videos that just recently came out. If you search Audio University acoustic treatment, it's the one that says acoustic treatment doesn't have to be complicated. I'm about to say it in a way that's probably pretty complicated because I don't have visual guides. But basically, you need a lot of velocity to convert that velocity to heat with a regular porous absorber, often called a velocity absorber. And against the walls, there's no velocity pretty much at all. There's a lot of pressure change. There'll be a lot of like positive pressure and then negative pressure. But where the velocity happens is kind of away from the wall. And specifically, if this is the wall, the velocity will peak at a quarter of the wavelength. Okay? And then it'll continue to go down, and right? So it'll be like a lot of velocity, a lot of pressure change. And if you just put a really thin panel against a wall, then you might reach that quarter wavelength at a very short wave. Or yeah, you might get the thickness required to put the velocity absorption for a very high frequency with a short wavelength. But if you want to treat lower frequencies like 103 hertz, you're going to need to be 0.8 meters away from the wall, which is about that far, I think. I'm an American. So Europeans out there, tell me if this is way off. I think that's about 0.8 meters. Um, yeah, so it's not entirely clear. Now, it's because you're using a tangential room mode, or talking about a tangential room mode, the angle of incidence isn't necessarily going to be directly on, which kind of helps you a little bit because you're going to be going through that thing. And then I think, now that I'm saying this, like the quarter wavelength principle, I think it assumes the angle of incidence is perpendicular to the wall. So all that to say, I would look into some of my videos on acoustic treatment, and you're going to be dealing with one of two things: velocity absorption, which tends to be very effective and cost effective, but to treat low frequencies, it's got to be very deep panels that you're using, and 0.8 meters is getting a little excessive. Or you can try a pressure absorber, like a Helmholtz resonator or something like that, which is going to be a lot more space effective for low frequencies. However, it's tuned to a specific frequency, and I think almost every case. So, yeah, it's also more expensive to do pressure absorption, and that may not be true, but it's definitely something you're going to want to have custom made for you, which can make it a little bit more difficult to actually plan and put into action. Okay? So, all that to say, one more question, and then we'll get out of here. So, hey, I love the content. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. What would you say is the best gear to buy first as a live audio production company? Well, if you have only speakers, you can't do much with that except play music from an iPhone or something. And if you have only microphones, that's not going to do you much good, you know? So it's like, to buy first is probably, depending on what you're doing. If you're just trying to take audio from a playback source and run it through, and you're trying to do small shows, probably a powered speaker, some sort of active speaker on a speaker stand would help you do that. If you're trying to do things for bands at a small level, powered speakers on stands with a microphone or microphones that you can use to mic the band. If you're just doing voice, then I don't know, grab a Telefunken M80 or a Shure SM58 or something like that, and you can plug that into some sort of mixer through speakers. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to say what to buy first, because a minimum viability of a live sound system is going to be a multi-component thing. You're going to probably need a microphone or several cables to connect it to a mixer to get a preamp and everything. You're going to need amplifier and speakers, or a speaker with an amplifier built in. So I would say if you're starting out a live audio production company, it's probably most common that people are going to start with a relatively small system of a microphone, a mixer, and a powered speaker setup. Okay, well, hey, here's the link to check out the membership, and I hope this was valuable. It looks like it was for a lot of people, and I'm kind of feeling a little sentimental at this point, but I appreciate you viewing, because the way that this has allowed me to connect with people it makes me feel very fortunate. And the way it's allowed me to connect with music and audio and learn more, just trying to learn things to teach you, it's a dream job. So thank you for being out there and appreciating what I do. And yeah, I'll see you next time. If you're interested in joining the membership, go ahead and click the link. Until next time,